Good morning, or good afternoon, or good whenever. We miss you here at school. I wanted today to share with you a book that is excellent for retelling key details. The title of the book is Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, also a movie. It's written by Judy Barrett and it's drawn by Ron Barrett. And it has sold over 3 million copies. So let's find out where the meatballs are coming from. We are all sitting around the big kitchen table. And it was Saturday morning, pancake morning. Mom was squeezing oranges for fresh orange juice, and Henry and I were betting on how many pancakes we could each eat, and Grandpa was doing the flipping. So here's Grandpa flipping away, flipping those pancakes. Well, seconds later, something flew through the air and headed towards the kitchen ceiling and landed right on Henry. After we realized that the flying object was just a pancake, we all laughed, even Grandpa. Breakfast continued quite uneventfully. All the other pancakes landed in the pan, and all of them were eaten, even the one that landed on Henry. Unbelievable, but true. They ate that one. That night, touched off by the pancake incident at breakfast, Grandpa told us the best tall tale bedtime story he'd ever told. A tall tale is when you stretch what's going on in that story and you exaggerate. Across an ocean, over lots of huge bumpy mountains, across 3 hot deserts and 1 smaller ocean, there was a tiny town. And there it is. Got to go a long way, and the tiny town is Swallow. Swallow, that's kind of weird. In most ways, it was like any other tiny town. It had a main street lined with stores and houses and trees and gardens around them and a schoolhouse and about 300 people and some assorted dogs and cats. But there was no food store in the town of Chew and Swallow. That's how you say it, Chew and Swallow. They didn't need any. The sky supplied all the food they wanted. And the only thing that was really different about Chew and Swallow was its weather. It came 3 times a day, at breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Everything that everyone ate came from the sky. Well, now, what if you didn't want to eat that? Whatever the weather served, that was what they ate. But it never rained, it never snowed, and it never just blew wind. It rained things like soup and juice. It snowed mashed potatoes, yuck, and green peas. And sometimes the wind blew in storms of hamburgers. If you like hamburgers, that would be a good day. The people could watch the weather report on television in the morning, and they would even hear a prediction for the next day's food. When the townspeople went outside, they carried their plates and their cups and their glasses with them, their forks, their spoons, their knives, and their napkins. That way, they would always be prepared for any kind of weather. If there was leftovers, there usually were, the people took them home and put them in the refrigerator in case they got hungry between meals. My goodness. The menu varied. By the time they woke up in the morning, breakfast was coming down. After a brief shower of orange juice, low clouds of sunny-side-up eggs moved in, followed by pieces of toast. Butter and jelly sprinkled down on the toast, and most of the time it rained milk afterwards, because you got to have that milk. For lunch one day, frankfurters already in the rolls blew in from the northwest at about 5 miles an hour. There were mustard clouds nearby. Then the wind shifted to the east and brought in baked beans. A drizzle of soda finished it off. Can you imagine if Coke came out of the sky or milkshakes? Yum! Dinner one night consisted of lamb chops, becoming heavy at times, with occasional ketchup. Periods of peas and baked potatoes were followed by gradual clearing with a wonderful jello setting in the west. The sanitation department of Chew and Swallow had a rather unusual job for a sanitation department. That's the trash men. It had to remove the food that fell on the houses and sidewalks and lawns. The workers cleaned up after every meal and fed it all to the dogs and the cats. Then they emptied some of it into the surrounding oceans for the fish and the turtles and the whales to eat, and the rest of the food was put back into the earth so the soil would be rich for anyone's garden. Life for the townspeople was delicious until the weather took a turn for the worse. This is in the paper. The Chew and Swallow Digest is the name of their paper. Spaghetti ties up town. So everything was tied up by the spaghetti. One day there was nothing but gorgonzola cheese all day long. And the next day there was only broccoli, and it was overcooked. Ooh. And the next day there were Brussels sprouts with peanut butter and mayonnaise. And another day there was pea soup fog. No one could see where they were going, and they could barely find the rest of the meal that got stuck in the fog. And my goodness, the food was getting larger and larger, and so were the portions. The people were getting frightened. Violent storms blew up frequently. Awful things were happening. One Tuesday, there was a hurricane of bread and rolls all day long and into the night. There were soft rolls and hard rolls, and some with seeds and some without. There was white bread and rye and whole wheat toast, and most of it was larger than they'd ever seen before. The bread was gigantic, and the rolls were too. It was a terrible day. Everybody stayed inside. The roofs were damaged, and the sanitation department was beside itself. It was a mess. And, excuse me, and it took 4 days to clean up that 1 day worth of food. To help out, the people piled as much bread as they could in their backyards, and the birds would eat it. Then there was a storm of pancakes. Oh, my gosh. A storm of pancakes pouring down with maple syrup that flooded the town. A huge pancake even covered the school, and no one could get it off because of its weight. They tried and tried. The sanitation department gave up. The job was just too big. Everyone feared for their lives. They couldn't go outside most of the time. Many of the houses had been badly damaged by giant meatballs, and stores were boarded up, and there was no more school for the children. So the decision was made to abandon the town of Chew and Swallow. It was a matter of survival. They had to leave. The people glued together the giant pieces of stale bread with peanut butter and took absolute necessities with them and set sail on their rafts for a new land. So they made rafts out of all the food, the giant food. That was pretty smart. After being afloat for a week, they finally reached a small coastal town which welcomed them. The bread had held up surprisingly well enough for them to build temporary houses out of it. The children began school again, and the adults all tried to find places for themselves in the new land. The biggest change they had was getting used to buying food at the grocery store. They found it odd that the food was kept on shelves, packaged in boxes, cans, and bottles. Meat that had to be cooked was kept in large refrigerators. Nothing came down from the sky. No, except rain and snow. The clouds above their heads were not made of fried eggs. And no one ever got hit by a hamburger again, thank goodness. And nobody dared to go back to Chew and Swallow to find out what had happened to it. They were too afraid. Henry and I were awake till the very end of Grandpa's story. I even remember his goodnight kiss. Aren't Grandpas wonderful? The next morning, we woke up to see snow falling outside the window. We ran downstairs for breakfast and ate it faster than usual so we could go sledding with Grandpa. It's funny, but even as we were sliding down the hill, we thought we saw a giant pat of butter at the top. We could almost smell mashed potatoes. That story really stuck. The end. Yum. Now, we have been working on retelling details of a story, and we start off with the main characters, the little boy and girl and their granddad, and what happens at the beginning of the story. That's right. Grandpa is cooking pancakes, and one flew across and hit the little boy in the head. Now, you probably don't remember the names of the little boy and the little girl, but the little boy is named Henry, and the little girl is called the narrator, so she doesn't really say her name. And so here we are. It flew into his head, and that they went on about their day, and that made Grandpa think of a tall tale. That's a story that exaggerates everything, and he told him the tall tale. In the beginning, all of the food came from the sky in the town of Chew and Swallow. And then in the middle, if you were retelling details, think about it. What details can you remember? What came out of the sky? And then in the also in the middle, the food got larger and larger and larger, and eventually what happened was they had to, in the end, leave Chew and Swallow and find a new place to live. And they had to fit in that new place, and they had to get used to food not coming out of the sky, but going to the grocery store to buy their food. I hope you enjoyed this book, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs. It's one of my favorites. And before we know it, we'll all be back together, and I want you to have a wonderful day and a wonderful Thanksgiving. And after Thanksgiving, we are having an online book fair, so remember that. Have a great day. Well, I guess it's good afternoon, boys and girls. I am so sorry that I missed seeing you yesterday on Zoom. Miss Hill just misunderstood, but I'm here today, and whenever you want to watch this, we are going to continue Jumanji. Now, I want you to think in your mind, what have we already found out about the book Jumanji by Chris Van Allsburg? If you remember, first of all, the names of the main characters are Peter and Judy, and their parents leave them home alone, and they go to the park. And in the park, they find a game, Jumanji. That's what they find. And they want to go home and play it. So that's what they did. And they found out that they had to play to the very end, or else the game was just going to keep going. So that's where we are. It is Peter's turn. And remember, this is a Caldecott Award winner. And so it won awards for the wonderful, wonderful illustrations. So Peter is counting 4, 5, 6. Bitten by a tsetse fly, contract sleeping sickness, lose 1 turn. Judy heard a faint buzzing noise and watched a small insect land on Peter's nose. Peter lifted his hand to brush the bug away and then stopped, gave a tremendous yawn, and fell asleep. Bam! His head hit the table. Peter, wake up, cried Judy, but it was no use. She grabbed the dice and moved to a blank. She rolled again and waited in amazement. Rhinoceros stampede, go back 2 spaces. Oh no! And as fast as Peter had fallen asleep, he woke up. Together they listened to the rumble in the hallway. It grew louder and louder, and suddenly a herd of rhinos charged through the living room and into the dining room, crushing all the furniture in their path. Peter and Judy covered their ears as sounds of splintering wood and breaking china filled the house. Oh, my heavens, this is worse than the Cat in the Hat when their parents left, their mother left them. Peter gave the dice a quick tumble. Python sneaks into camp. Go back one space. Judy shrieked and jumped up on her chair. Over the fireplace, said Peter. Judy sat down again, nervously eyeing the 8-foot snake above the fireplace, wrapping itself around the mantel clock. The guide looked up from his map, took one look at the snake, and moved to the far corner of the room, joining the monkeys on the couch. Remember, they had monkeys. Monkeys were in the beginning of the book. So here, oh, did you see the snake? The snake is up here. And because the pictures are black and white but have such depth, you can see the details. Judy took her turn and landed on a blank space. Her brother took the dice and rolled 3. Oh no, he moaned. Volcano erupts. Go back 3 spaces. The room became warm and started to shake. And then molten lava poured from the fireplace opening. It hit the water on the floor and the room filled with steam. Judy rolled the dice and moved ahead. Discover shortcut. Roll again. Oh dear, she cried. Judy saw the snake unwrapping itself from the clock. If you roll a 12, you can get out of the jungle, said Peter. Roll, quick, quick. Please, Judy begged, please. So she shook the dice. The snake was wriggling across the floor to get her, and she dropped the dice from her hand. Excuse me. And 1 6, then another. Judy grabbed her piece, slammed it on the board, and yelled, Jumanji! And she yelled it as loud as she could. Oh, my heavens. And then, oops, Miss Hill can't get the page turned. The steam in the room became thicker and thicker. Judy could not even see Peter across the table. Then, as if all the doors and windows had been opened, a cool breeze cleared the steam from the room. Everything was just as it had been before. No monkeys, no guide, no water, no broken furniture, no snake, no lion roaring upstairs, no rhinos. Without saying a word to each other, Peter and Judy threw the game into the box, bolted out the door, ran across the street to the park, and dropped the game under the tree. Back home, they quickly put all their toys away, but both children were too excited to sit quietly, so Peter took out a picture puzzle. As they fit the pieces together, their excitement slowly turned to relief and then exhaustion. With the puzzle half done, Peter and Judy fell sound asleep on the sofa. So here's the picture of them running out of the house to take that game back, because they certainly don't want that game. They are done. Wake up, dears, Mother's voice called. Judy opened her eyes. Mother and Father had returned, and their guests were arriving. Judy gave Peter a nudge to wake him up. Mother introduced her guest. Did you have an exciting afternoon, she asked. And Peter said, oh, yes, we had a flood and a stampede and a volcano, and I got sleeping sickness. And Peter was interrupted by adults' laughter because, of course, they did not believe him. Well, I think you both got sleeping sickness. Go upstairs and put on your pajamas, and then you can finish your puzzle and have some dinner. So the adults didn't even believe them. When Peter and Judy came downstairs, they found that Father had moved the puzzle into the den. While the children were working on it, one of the guests, Mrs. Budwing, brought them a tray of food. Such a hard puzzle, she said. My children, Daniel and Walter, are always starting puzzles, but they never finish. They never read the instructions either. Oh, well, I guess they'll learn. Both children answered, I hope so, but they really weren't looking at Mrs. Budwing. They were looking out the window. They saw 2 boys running through the park. It was Daniel and Walter Budwing. Oh no, and Daniel had a thin box under his arm. So Jumanji continues and continues and continues. So now we talked about how to retell a story, and we're not together, so I can't really ask you questions, but I want you to think. First of all, you talk about the 2 main characters. Peter and Judy were left home alone. Next, the beginning of the story. Peter and Judy, they pull out all their toys. They get bored with their toys, so they go to the park. And in the park, they find a game. In the middle of the story, what happens? Think about it. You could even think about it in the correct sequence. They come back and they read the instructions and they start playing the game. And the first thing that happens is the lion. And then you can think in sequence. What comes next? What comes next? What comes next? And finally, they have the volcano. And at the end of the book, Judy rolls a 12, and she gets to Jumanji, and everything disappears, and the house goes back to the way it was. And thank goodness that happens before the parents get home, and they wonder what would have happened if Mom and Dad had got home and the house had been a mess. But Peter told his parents all about it, and they laughed. They didn't believe them. They just didn't believe them. I hope you enjoyed Jumanji. Next week, we're going to read another wonderful book, Cloudy with a Chance of Meatballs, and also we are going to be working on retelling the story. Listen, y'all have a wonderful weekend, and I look forward to being with you again next week. Thank you.